Good evening, everyone, and welcome to you all. I am Amy Oberholzer, the founder of Catch, and on behalf of the Catch team, I want to thank Erica Leibrandt and her colleagues at Sound Mind Counseling for joining us today and sharing their expertise with our community while we wrestle with the pain and confusion of the last week. We're gathered tonight for support and guidance following the sudden death of Dylan Buckner, a beloved senior at GBN. Our deepest condolences go out to the Buckner family and those closest to them as they mourn their loss. Dylan died by suicide after battling hard with the monster named depression. I know that many of us are scared and worried about our own children's mental health, particularly as the pandemic lingers. We don't know what's best when talking with our kids about what's happened. It's our hope that we can begin to heal by gathering together and gaining a better understanding about how we can best talk with our kids honestly and productively about Dylan's passing, about mental illness, and about suicide. All of you here are muted tonight, but we want to address as many of your questions as possible. Please feel free to put them in the chat, and the Catch team will collect and organize them. And following her talk, I will ask Erica as many as we can get to. Erica Leibrandt is a Northwestern University educated psychotherapist specializing in anxiety and depression. She began this work after her 16-year-old son tragically took his life in 2004. And she's been advocating for adolescents and suicide awareness and prevention since then. Erica believes that communication with teens is key in preventing not just suicide, but debilitating mental health issues that compromise our children's quality of life. She's dedicated to helping parents learn the right language to connect with their teens, as well as providing other tools, insights, and resources to empower them. We are very pleased to welcome Erica Leibrandt.
Thank you so much, Amy, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here tonight, and I'm so grateful for all of you who've chosen to attend. It shows me what an awesome community we live in. When something bad happens, we pull together, we talk it out, we don't sweep it under the rug, and I commend you all for having that attitude. That's a game-changing attitude to have. I'd like to take a minute to introduce specifically my two colleagues who are joining us this evening. Tara Parker, who is our marriage and family specialist at Sound Mind Counseling, as well as Michelle Waters, who is our adolescent specialist and is the director of our therapeutic art program called Art. I will be directing questions towards them that I feel they're better equipped to answer than I. And with that, Julie, we will move on to the next slide. Thank you. So why I'm here. Amy mentioned that I lost my son by suicide in 2004. That was the beginning of a very long journey for my family. And we were helped along the way by countless individuals in ways that still humble me today. That support, that surprising support and love that we were shown is the reason I do what I do now. I feel compelled to give back, and I am so, again, grateful for Catch giving me the opportunity to have a voice on this very difficult subject. Many people are unwilling to talk about mental health issues and specifically suicide. But Catch is right there, willing to hash out the tough talks and the tough conversations. And it just is so important not to hide from the reality of mental health issues in our teens, particularly during the pandemic, as Amy also mentioned. Next slide, please. So we're gonna look at scary statistics. I'm not a big fan of statistics, but when it gives us kind of a chilling reality check, I think they are appropriate. It's because Dylan just passed, suicide is on the forefront of our minds this week. but it's always prevalent. It is the second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 34. Even I, a mental health professional, am shocked to read that. And these are statistics from 2018. So I'm going to assume that the 2019 and 20 stats are even worse due to the pandemic. Kids as young as 10, second leading cause of death. Just so hard to wrap one's mind around. And also, you know, especially here in Chicago, we're known for homicides, but there are more than twice as many suicides in America as there are homicides. An average of 132 suicides per day, 132 families like the Buckners that have to somehow figure out how to put the pieces back together and move on. You know, we want to talk about pandemics and epidemics. Well, this is one as well. Next slide, right. So I don't know if this is common knowledge at this point or not, but I thought it was worth going over the signs and symptoms of depression. Diagnostically, we look for 5 or more of these symptoms to be sustained over the course of 2 weeks or longer. There's a lot of wiggle room on that. Of course, diagnosing depression is not as black and white as one might want it to be. But classic signs of depression include a hopeless outlook, really just not seeing any thing in the future that is worth getting excited about. Loss of interest in the things that one is normally interested in, increased fatigue or sleep problems, anxiety. We think about anxiety and depression as 2 different clinical diagnoses, but anxiety can be a symptom of depression. So someone may seem kind of hyper or disjointed in their thinking, and that anxiety can be a result actually of depression. That's a hard one to kind of figure out sometimes. Irritability, changes in appetite or weight, uncontrolled emotion. So really hyper emotionality, what we might call being dramatic in our kids. And suicidal ideation. So we'll talk more about the differences in passive versus active suicidal ideation as we move forward. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about our kids, we can get really emotional. It is very hard for us to be objective when it comes to the subject of our own children. And what happens is something called transference. We can transfer our own emotions onto our children as we interact with them and try to assess what their state of mind might be. We need to be very, very careful not to do this. And fortunately, there are some simple ways to avoid it. When you speak to your child, really connect to your own breath. Feel yourself breathing. That helps you to not get so wrapped up in the energy of your child's emotions and sort of stay in your own lane. You can look at visual details of your child. Look at their skin, their hair, the way they're wearing their clothes. Really focus in on those details. Again, that's a way to separate out how you feel from what is going on with them. And you'll have a much clearer picture of what's happening for them and their reality. And also you can feel in your own body where the tension seems to crop up. You know, is it in your stomach? Is it in your chest? Does your head hurt? You don't have to do anything about it. Just observe that that's happening. And you'll find, oddly, that you're much better able to perceive your child's state of being. If all of that seems totally impossible, overwhelming, can't do it, that is a pretty decent sign that you are in over your head. And who among us hasn't been in over our heads, especially with teenagers, right? I mean, they're just so tough. So if you're feeling that way, like I'm at a loss, I can't separate it out, I'm so emotional myself, you know, consider getting support. It's a great way to promote the overall health of your family. Your health is important. So I urge parents many times who have problematic children, they really need to be in treatment too. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. Next slide. So there is a controversy about whether or not speaking about suicide with teens increases the risk of them completing suicide. Study after study after study shows talking about suicide with teens does not increase the risk of them completing suicide. So we need to just deal with our fear around this subject, know that we're not making it worse by talking about it, and that in fact, we can make things better. Teens need to know that just about every single person who ever lived on this earth has had thoughts of suicide, right? You think about it. Maybe it was when you were a teenager. Maybe it was when you just first had your first child and everything seemed overwhelming. Most of us, the vast majority of us, have at least had moments where we thought it would just be easier not to be here, right? And if we can convey that normalcy of thinking to our teens, that goes a great way to helping them feel understood, not marginalized, and getting them out of hiding, right? You don't have to harp on it. It doesn't have to be a huge, long conversation, but just make them understand that you get it. People think this way sometimes. It doesn't make you bad or weird or anything. It just is what it is. It's part of being human. There is, however, a difference between passive and active, as I mentioned earlier, suicidal ideation. So that's important, and we'll get to that in a sec. So how do we actually talk to our kids? I'm saying, oh, talk to them, talk to them. How do we really do it? It's hard to know. Teens don't want to talk to us. And it hurts, actually, right? As parents, it's painful. Here's this person you love so much, and they just don't want to have anything to do with you. It's the worst. Fortunately, I stumbled across a book a few years ago that was intended to, it was research about violent offenders, prison populations. And it's called De-Escalate, How to Calm Down an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. And I read this book and I realized, oh my gosh, these techniques would work with teens. Who knew, right? So the slides, the next 3 slides are my adaptation of that communication strategy. And it works wonderfully well. You will be surprised. First, you make an observation. You see some of them right here. You seem super stressed out lately. And I also want to point out, I have at the top here, I feel like you are. And I said earlier, you don't necessarily want to talk about your feelings or focus on your feelings. This is just like a way to communicate with a teen the way they might communicate with each other. They'll often say, I feel like this or that, when they're not really talking about a feeling. So you can say either you seem, or I feel like you're super stressed, really exhausted, not having much fun. Make an observation about what you see happening in your teenager's life. And don't expect them to answer it or anything. It's just a statement. And then move on to the next thing, which is ask an open question. So an open question is different from a closed question, because an open question is difficult to answer with a yes or a no. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. Teenagers usually will figure out a way, but we want to make it harder for them to just say, yes, no, I don't know, whatever. So an open question. Is it something at school, or is it more about friends? You give them 2 choices. They can pick one of those things to talk about. And they might just grunt out, it's school. But that's still communication happening, right? So an open question, is there something different going on? What's your biggest problem right now? That's a great one. Love that one. That will usually get the most reticent teen talking. Is there one issue you wish would just disappear? That's another really effective question. And even if your teen doesn't answer you, I'm going to talk about this again as well, because this is extremely important. Even if your teenager does not answer that question, they know that you're paying attention. They know it's like they're having a conversation with you in their head. They just can't actually talk, but you are having a conversation. as frustrating as it is for you. So just have faith that there's been an interaction there that is meaningful. And then the last piece of this communication style is to reflect feelings. This feels kind of awkward. You make it a very basic statement. It seems like you're sad. It seems like you're exhausted. And as soon as you hit the right emotion, you'll see something change in your kid. The shoulders might drop. They might lean a little bit towards you. As soon as you perceive that slight change in body language, you know you got the right emotion. And even again, if they don't respond, they have felt heard. The two of you are in emotional alignment in that moment. This is incredibly powerful and important. So these three things, make an observation, ask an open question, reflect feelings, is by far the most effective way that I have found to keep doors open with our kids. And again, if you want to read more about it, we have at the end in our resources, the book that I mentioned, De-Escalate, which I would highly recommend any parent read, even though it's not specifically for parents of teens. So the dreaded teen eye roll. We've got our little friend here making his face. We all know that face, right? This is the nightmare face. I hate the teen eye roll. It's so precisely designed to demoralize a parent and make us just turn away and give up. Don't fall for it. And also don't worry, because if you did all the things that I just said, make an observation, ask an open question, observe, reflect feelings. If you do that, the eye roll is not important. You've established a connection, and that's all you need to know. And the more you do it, the less likely it is that you'll get the eye roll. So you just want to kind of make this like a standard fare in your household, that type of interaction. So don't worry about the eye roll, it's fine. So this is important, right? Because all suicidal thinking is not created equal. As I said, the great majority of us have had some thought at some time in our lives that it would be easier just not to be around. And that's not necessarily dangerous. That's just the human brain trying to think of ways to cope with problems. And the marker of passive suicidal ideation or thinking is just that we don't have an actual plan in place with which to die. It's not complicated. And contrary to that, active suicidal thinking has a plan. So as Amy mentioned at the beginning of this, we lost our son to suicide. I guarantee you, though I did not know it at the time and was not aware of it, he had a plan in place to take his life. And if I had had better communication skills at that time, I may have been able to discern that, right? But I didn't. I'm not blaming myself, but developing those communication skills and styles can help you establish to what degree your child is or is not in danger, right? So you can use the tools, the icebreakers with this subject as well. On the bottom here, you can say, you know, most people think about just taking a pass on life every now and then. That's your statement. Do you ever think stuff like that? That's your open-ended question. And then you can say, does it ever get pretty intense? And then maybe ask them to scale it out for you. Like a scale of 1 to 10, how intense does that really get for you? And just be interested. Don't be scared. Don't be judgmental. Just look at it like you're gathering data. You just want to be interested in their experience. If you talk to your teen from a place of fear, they are going to shut down. So talk to them from a place of wanting to find out interesting things. Makes a huge difference. Next slide. Okay, so So, you know, you've had the conversations, you've noticed signs of depression in your kid, you know, it's pretty undeniable. There's something going on. You're worried. And you're thinking, I got to get this kid in treatment, you know. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. And you want to also make sure that if your kid is going to treatment, they're as non-resistant as possible, because a resistant teen in treatment doesn't do that well, generally speaking. So you want to kind of get them on board. Use your icebreakers. It seems like it could use an extra person to bounce stuff off of. Have you ever thought about therapy? Does it seem scary, weird, stupid? And whatever they say, don't get defensive, don't get worked up about it. Just kind of roll with the conversation. And if they totally shut you down, you can say, look, you've been feeling pretty bad for a while. It's totally obvious, right? You know, if you still feel this bad in a week or so, can we revisit this? Does that seem reasonable? So it's a subtle negotiation with them around this topic. You don't have to resolve it in one conversation. It can be an ongoing conversation. And I find that in most cases, a conversation with a teen about therapy like that ends up well. Not always, but often. So one of the things you need to really stress to your teen is that they're going to be not in control of therapy, but they're going to have a voice. And this is another thing I really regret about what happened with my son. He was in treatment, but it wasn't a great, the therapist was great, but it wasn't a great fit for him. And I knew it, but it never even occurred to me to find somebody else. I can't believe it. It didn't. And if you tell your kid, you know, look, let's just try this. You can audition this therapist, go to maybe 2 or 3 appointments. And if it's just not working for you, let's find somebody else who's great. It's fine. It's no big deal. So with no pressure. If I had done that, that very well could have been the variable that changed the outcome of my son's life. And that's the truth. So this might be the most important thing that I say tonight, honestly. And there's so many different kinds of therapy. Like we have my colleague, Michelle Waters, she does art therapy. I would have loved that as a teen. It's just a completely different style of doing therapeutic work. And it's great for kids who are creative and artistic, and maybe, you know, who struggle with verbalization. There's all kinds of different modalities. You know, we have cognitive behavioral that appeals to some people more than like psychodynamic, which is what we do at Sound Mind Counseling. And that's looking at all the different parts of someone's life. So maybe educate yourself a little bit on different modalities and even different licenses. We have social workers, we have, you know, counselors, psychologists, all different kinds of licensures. But most important is that element of personal preference. You got to find your kid someone that they connect with. The number one, and studies prove this, predictor of effective therapy is the relationship that is developed between the client and the clinician. There's no other factor that indicates more successful therapy than that. So just keep trucking until you find someone who's a great fit for you too. This applies for us adults, as well as for our kids. And keeping our own houses clean. So a lot of times our teens are what is called the IP, or identified patient. And because teenagers are so full of intense emotions, they often are acting out things that are unspoken in the rest of the family, problems in the family, problems in the marriage, trauma, family trauma. Kids feel all this, and many of the other family members might be able to keep a lid on it, but the teen doesn't, so they identify the teen as the problem. Teens are part of family systems, and if the family system is sick, the teen will never get better. So we need to check in with ourselves. How is my mental health? How is my marriage? How is the mental health of my other kids? What's the bigger picture about the environment my child is operating within, right? So if you have to get in therapy, marriage therapy, whatever, just all therapy all day, there's probably not enough hours in the day for the therapy everyone needs, honestly, but this is important. Remember that our teenagers are part of a system, and that means we have to take a look at what's going on with us. I really wanted to talk about this because of what did happen with the Buckners. You know, when we lost our son, I was totally astonished by the outpouring of love from this community. I have never seen anything like it in my life. People were at our house night and day for weeks, just filling the house with love and support. And I'm an introvert, so I would have thought that would be the worst nightmare ever. But it was the only thing that helped us get through that time. Remarkable. The Buckner family will not get to have that experience because of the pandemic. And that breaks my heart for them. But that doesn't mean we can't support them. And it also doesn't mean we know what to do. A lot of times we just don't know what to do. So maybe we don't do anything. Practical help is always welcome. Send a cleaning lady over to their house, you know, get a lawn service for them. Whatever, I guarantee you no one wants to clean after their kid dies. So think about those things. What if my child died, what would I not be able to do? And how can I maybe help that family get that thing done? Also, this was so important, bring up memories. Sometimes we're afraid to talk about our experiences of a lost loved one, and we shouldn't be. Even if it's painful for the person to hear, we're adding to the lexicon of their memory of that person, right? So we're really giving them this gift of continuing their relationship with the lost person by adding memories to them, to their catalog. Even if the memories are secondhand, you know, I heard your son did this, that, the other. Those are gems for parents or for anyone who's lost someone. And if they cry, that's fine. It doesn't mean you did something bad. They're already sad. You're not going to make them any more sad. Offer resources. I have some resources in the next card. My wonderful neighbor who also survived a suicide and her family gave us the resource that enabled us to heal. Catholic Charities, the Lost Program. You're grieving, you have no idea who to reach out to, what to do. You have no idea. She handed us a pamphlet and said, call these people right now. And we did, and they helped us. So just black and white resources, just give it to them. If they don't use it, fine, but just have it there for them. Remembering anniversaries. It takes a real long time to heal from a death, especially a tragic death, and especially that of a child. When the anniversary rolls around, most people have moved on, but the family has not. It's been 17 years since we lost our son, and it's still unbearably painful, particularly on the anniversary. If you can reach out to a family on the anniversary of the death of their child in any way, that is powerful. You don't have to personally speak to them. You can leave a card or leave a message. Anything that you do, and this is the last point, anything that you do is better than nothing. Don't worry about feeling awkward or shy or making a mistake. You will. Do it anyway. Wow. So here we have some resources. These are all great resources, or I wouldn't have included them. The first one is just the National Institute for Mental Health. It's the greatest place to get an overview of diagnostics, like what's going on, how do you perceive that someone is or isn't mentally ill, resources, statistics, information, very rich website that's updated constantly. Willow House is a local program that helps kids deal with grief. They do groups, they do individual, and it's all free of charge. So if somebody doesn't have good insurance, or just whatever situation has arisen for them, Willow House is a wonderful, warm place that will go out of their way to help you. We have Catholic Charities, the Lost Program, which is the program my husband and I attended. Specifically Father Ruby, who spoke with us for free for over a year. Now, we did make a huge donation, but it wasn't required. And he was amazing. All he does is talk to people about suicide, and he's the most expert of experts in that area. Let's see. I think I have NEMI there twice. What was I trying to get to? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'll clarify that second NIMHE one. We have Alyssa's Mission, who was founded by two parents who lost their daughter to suicide about 17 years ago. And they're wonderful because they get involved with fundraising. And if you want to do things besides catch things to help other people become educated, become aware of suicide, Alyssa's Mission is a great resource. I love them over there. Then of course we have Catch's community, the awesome people at Catch who put on this presentation today. Oh, and I just remember what that NEMI one was. So again, if you want to support people, or if you're a grieving parent, or you're just a grieving friend of someone who took their lives, there is something called Out of the Darkness that is run by the National Institute for Mental Health. And they do all kinds of things like walks, overnight walks, big walks, small walks, and all to raise money for suicide prevention and awareness. It's another wonderful, wonderful program that my family and I are involved with. Then of course, my practice, we're here for you in whatever way we can be. We're local, right in Glenview, next to Lions School. And then the last thing is this book that I recommended, De-Escalate, developed for violent offending prisoners, but great for teens. I really have to say that book permanently changed how I speak to my own kids. So I can't say enough good things about it. And I think that is it. I am ready, willing, and able to take your questions if you have them.
Erica, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That kind of frank conversation is so needed and so refreshing, and Catch is so glad you're a friend of ours. Erica, the first question this evening is this. If you believe a child has been in danger before and possibly had suicidal thoughts, how do you stay on top of them in a productive and effective way without creating a wall between you and them?
Yeah, this is such a great question, and really speaks to what I was talking about earlier in terms of developing an overall communication style that's effective, not just for emergencies, but for maybe smaller issues as well. So hopefully a kid like this will be in therapy. They have been in trouble, their mental health is compromised. Really, we need to do everything in our power to make sure that kid or kid like that is getting treatment consistently that is a good fit for them. And in terms of staying on top of them, I would suggest two things. One, if they are in therapy, working with the therapist to develop language you can use with your child around this subject. Maybe normalizing, scaling how they're feeling, a quick check-in, scale of 1 to 10, kid, how you feeling? But negotiating that with a therapist who's a neutral party beforehand, so that your child doesn't feel attacked or patronized, right? And then the second thing that I would say is you stay on top of bigger issues by staying on top of smaller issues. In other words, you want to be connecting with your child around smaller, more neutral stuff, so that when you have to ask about the bigger stuff, it's not so jarring. You're not suddenly like sticking your nose like in this place where you're not welcome at all. So parents, I get it. It's really hard to talk to teens. They're going to do the eye roll. They're going to shut you out, shut you down, shrug. Keep trying. Don't let them get the better of you. Try to keep it light. Try to find some soft places to talk to them. Something funny, a meme, anything. Even if they don't respond, there is a conversation happening. Try and remember that and keep your head in the game.
What do I tell my kids about how to respond to their friends who are struggling?
Yeah, that's also a tough one. You know, kids a lot of times won't reach out because they're worried about being ratted out and having their confidentiality compromised. At the same time, kids at this day and age are pretty well accepting of the fact that if they reach out to a friend, that friend is probably going to tell an adult. Our kids have been trained to do that at this point. So I would say to my kid, if your friend did speak to you about this, they're probably looking for a back door to get some help. And they might be mad at you for saying something to an adult, and that's okay. You still need to do it. Even if you lose a friend, at least someone didn't die. I would say that you can talk to them about passive versus active suicidal ideation. It's not that this should be on the kids' shoulders, but you can say, well, maybe you can talk to them about exactly what they're feeling so they can keep having a conversation before you don't want to just sort of dismiss that child, talk to an adult, and then shut the whole thing down. You can tell your kid, you know, you should tell an adult, but you can also continue to have a conversation with your friend. And that might be very meaningful for your friend.
That's a tough one for kids, for sure.
Tough. And, you know, my answer really also depends on what age the kids are. You know, as my stats showed you, kids as young as 10 are really actively suicidal. And so a 10-year-old who has a friend who's in that state of mind should not have to carry on a conversation about suicide. So I would temper my response with that thought.
It seems like, too, the more we can normalize conversation about mental health, the easier it will be for kids to approach their own peers, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It doesn't seem as though they're coming out of left field. It's more normal.
And the fact that mental health shifts and changes, and that just because we're struggling with terrible feelings right now doesn't mean that's our destiny or our fate. So that mental health should be portrayed as something that is always in flux, and that it's something you can heal from. I think that's something kids don't really get. Like it feels, when you feel bad, it feels like it's just going to go on forever and ever and ever. But there are really concrete things that can help kids feel better. And I think it is helpful to them to have that pointed out.
How much should I share about my own fears and highly charged emotions when I'm truly worried about my child? Oh, this one gets me in the gut.
Same. And, you know, I could answer it a variety of ways, but I think the best answer is share, but in a very limited and controlled way. You cannot allow yourself to get overly emotional, because then your child does not feel like they can trust you. If you're getting emotional, they can't be emotional. So you have to really keep the space for them to feel their emotions. So if you can share with them in a more factual way, with a factual tone of voice, look, I'm telling you, I'm really scared for you, you know, and I really want to do something about this because it's a crappy feeling to be this scared. So let's figure something out. That is a lot different than being like, oh, I'm so worried about you. What are we going to do? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's really about delivery and being in control of yourself, as difficult as that is. And if you were in a position to talk calmly and reasonably, then yes, make a finite statement about your feelings regarding it, but then really move on. You don't want to go on and on and on, much like I am doing right now.
Here's another question. My son has threatened suicide in the past. He is 12. I still monitor his cell phone messages and have a tracking app on his phone to tell me his location.
Yeah.
He has started fighting me on this and telling me it's an invasion of his privacy. At what age do you feel it is no longer appropriate for a parent to monitor their child's device?
Another tough question. First, I want to say that it's totally appropriate at age 12 to do those things, especially since we now have the technology to do it. That said, monitoring devices is really not a great deal of insurance for a child's safety. A child like this should certainly be in treatment. And if a child like this is in treatment, then as I said earlier, the conversations around these subjects should happen in a therapy room with the neutral party of the therapist present. That way, parent and child can develop language that feels good to both of them that they can then use out of the therapy room. Tracking on technology should be something that's negotiated. You know, if your child is at 16 and is wildly, actively suicidal, you probably still want those tracking, apps working. But you don't want to lie about it. You don't want to do it in secret. You do want to have a conversation with them in therapy about why you have to make this choice and how that choice can change. You know, you say, if you seem like you're doing better, you know, if we work together to get a handle on your mental health, if you're taking your meds, if you're getting exercise, if you're eating, all of those things will help change how adamant I am about whether or not we need trackers. So you, child, have a lot more control over this than perhaps you might imagine. So let's work together to make it so that we don't need to use this stupid thing.
When do you go to the ER with your child?
That, I'm going to say, is the toughest question yet. And the reason is sometimes going to the ER can traumatize kids even more than it can make them feel even worse than they're already feeling. But look, if they are out of control, if you have discovered they have a suicidal plan, even if a friend has said they have a plan, just go. And whatever the fallout is, it is. You can deal with it later. The good part about going to the ER is you go when you need to just keep your child alive in that moment. And you don't feel confident that you can do that. If you're at that point, you make the call immediately or get in the car. And don't second guess yourself, right? And your kid's going to be really pissed at you. And it might end up being a secondary trauma or another event that has to be processed in therapy. But if you feel in your heart, and you'll know, you're a mom, you know, or a dad, if you feel in your heart, I am not confident that I can keep my kids safe, go.
So I think this question is referring back to the 3 steps that you outlined from de-escalation. What if I ask those questions and I don't have an answer or any idea how to resolve the issue or even help them resolve it for themselves? For example, the one thing I'd get rid of is school. What if they say that? They clearly have to go to school.
Yeah.
I don't want to seem like I don't care or know what to do.
That's such a great question. The answer is you don't have to solve it. All you have to do is reflect their feelings. The conversation is not about changing circumstances. It's about connecting to your child's feelings and being aligned with them. So you say something like, God, wouldn't that be amazing if you just didn't have to go to school? What do you think your life would look like? Just grant them their fantasy in the conversation. And when you do that, it brings down their intensity of mood because they feel like they're sharing this burden with you. So you don't have to have concrete answers. All you have to do is establish that you're in tune with their emotions.
So these next three questions are all around therapy and seeking therapy and some questions about once your child is in therapy. So what strategies do you have to reach out to therapists and they have no openings to see your child? Also, what if your child, mine is 12, simply refuses to try a new therapist after a poor experience with his last one?
Okay. So this may not be the most politically correct answer, but from my experience, Psychology Today is really the best overall resource for connecting with a therapist. And the reason I like Psychology Today is because it's comprehensive. One, pretty much every clinician is on there. Two, you can filter out for insurance and for modality, licensure, and all of those things that I talked about before. And three, you know that Psychology Today is alerting the therapist that you called. So you don't have to wonder like if it's just going into the ether. Psychology Today does a very good job of letting therapists know that someone is trying to get in touch with them. So I would go on to Psychology Today and put in my filters and choose 3 people that I think are great and call all of them and see who calls you back first. And whoever calls you back first is the most invested in your well-being, in my opinion. And as to the 12-year-old who doesn't want to try therapy again, it has to be a negotiation. You're the parent, and you can't force anybody to do anything, but you can say, clearly you are not feeling well. You seem really sad, really frustrated lately. I know that you can feel better than this. If you still feel like this in a week, can we talk about this again? So just set it up so that your child knows you're going to have more conversations about this, and you're not going to drop this idea, and you're not going to allow them to be in control of the conversation. And, you know, if worse comes to worse, you make an appointment for them and you say, look, I'm sorry, but we're going to go to this together. And you go in with them.
So you're just asking us to squish all of our fears and our panic down and just be super patient. Okay.
That's right. Yes. Don't feel your feelings.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Actually, don't feel them with your kid. Feel them in a
We're not going to end on that note, I'll tell you that much. So this is another additional question about around therapy. How can a parent communicate or gather information about their child's progress with a therapist or with an inpatient psych therapy in a hospital with HIPAA in place?
Well, HIPAA does not apply to children under the age of 18 when it comes to parents. So different therapists have different levels of comfortability in terms of sharing what happens in session. And if you really feel like you need more of an open conversation with the clinician about what's happening with your kid, you should discuss that with them before treatment even begins. And you can say something like, you know, what is generally your relationship with parents? How much transparency do you tend to have with parents? Now, you're not going to know everything that goes on in therapy because that's not appropriate either. But if it's important to you to really know more rather than less, that's the personal preference of the clinician, and you need to establish that at the outset. It is harder to do with an inpatient program because they just in general are more reluctant to share details, and those are usually crisis intervention situations as well. So you probably get information about whether your child's suicidal or not, but you might not get a whole lot more than that. My best advice is to really, as a parent, cultivate a relationship with the therapist. Check in, you know, say, how's my kid doing? The therapist is not just going to shut you down. They may not tell you everything you want to know, but you'll feel that you have enough information to most likely be comfortable with what's happening.
And then I think this might be, well, there may be more therapy questions, but as a therapist, What is your first open-ended question when talking to a teen who is grieving the loss of a friend to suicide?
I don't know. Depends on the teen. I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, I would just sit with them to start and just let them sit in the room and feel their energy and see what's happening for them. You know, they might come in the room and immediately start crying because it's the one place they have permission to cry. And if that something like that happened, I would just let them. I might say something like, "You've been through a lot, you know, I bet it's been really tough for you." And really focus on their emotions, not so much focusing on the person who passed, but just focusing on that child's emotions, you know, like, how has this changed things in your life? You know, what's different now than it used to be? What are you most sad about? You know, do you feel like you have anyone you can really talk to? Or does this just feel like something you have to hold inside yourself? Those are the kind of questions I would ask.
You have a hard job.
I love my job, but it is hard.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then we will wrap it up for the evening. I do want to let you know before we proceed that Erica has agreed to respond to any other questions that you might have in writing after tonight's presentation if we run out of time to get to everyone. So if you do have more questions, please put them in the chat, and Erica has agreed to answer each and every one of them, which is really lovely. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What is the profile of a child or youth who finds success with art therapy?
Well, I'm going to toss that one to Michelle.
All right. Really good question. I would say success in art therapy looks a lot different because usually what's going on is something beyond the verbal. A lot of kids will struggle to put their emotions into words because they're not used to it. They're still working on that abstract thought, that those brain connections are just not always there yet. So what I consider success is when a kid feels comfortable in the therapy space and actually feels able to start opening up at their own pace. So with art being sort of that mediator, that buffer, you know, teens are often described as these vaults or these the walls are enclosed and it's very hard to get through. But, you know, with art being sort of that buffer in that space, they can take their time to unpack all of the things that they've been holding on to for so long. So I see success as being able to open up and sit in the space with someone and really go into those dark spaces that a lot of places they're not allowed to go, like at school or with their friends. You know, art therapy is not about making art for other people. It's not about making a product. It's not about, you know, starting an art gallery or anything. It's a place to explore those feelings in a way that feels more appropriate for kids, you know, and adults at times too. So it's not about skill level or content. It's more about how do we work through feelings together in a way that feels safe and comfortable for the kids. And teenagers, I think, just kind of gravitate more towards art because, you know, they have so much more access to those creative outlets. And I think as we get older, we get pushed out of them more. So I think it just feels more natural for them. But yeah, that's kind of what I see as success.
I'm going to ask this one because I really think this is an important one myself. What should I do if one of my child's friends discloses that they are very depressed, but their parents have dismissed their concerns in the past, that they think therapy is BS and just buck up and stop moaning? How do I help the child without breaking their trust and stepping on the parents' toes?
Tough question, you know, and the answer in some part is we can't always help. We don't always have the answers and we can't always help. If the child is not our child and the parent is making parenting decisions, then we're really out of our depth on that one. If the child has disclosed something along those lines to you, however, obviously you are a trusted individual. And if you have the wherewithal, then what you can do is just be a friend to that child, and offer a safe space. And it can be scary because, you know, you're not a trained professional, you don't know what you're doing, but you might be the only person that child has to rest his head against. And so if you have it within you to be that person, despite being worried about making mistakes or missteps, I would absolutely go ahead and do that. So, and just focusing on listening and being there. And, you know, if it's clear the parents aren't going to support any kind of therapeutic intervention, I would not pursue that idea. And I would tell the child, you know, I'm just here for you. If you ever want to talk, I'm not a professional. Maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about, but I think you're awesome and I'm here for you.
So maybe I'll just end it with a comment that was left in the chat, because I think it kind of leaves us with a sense of hope. And my daughter attended monthly meetings at Willow House for over 3 years after my husband's suicide. She learned coping skills and the need to ask for help that have served her for years. She was 8 when he died, and she is now a responsible, well-adjusted 33-year-old. There is great hope for those left behind. Erica, we cannot thank you enough. It just means the world to Catch, and I'm so glad that all of you guys came tonight and were vulnerable about this topic that I know is difficult, particularly now. Keep talking, and Catch will be in touch.
Thank you, Amy, so much, and to the whole Catch team, thank you for this privilege of speaking today.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, or find us at catchescommunity.org. Catch is dedicated to making a difference in our community through empowering families to raise resilient and independent youth.